Hey everybody, won't always bored, never boring. Today I thought it might be fun to do a top 5 list. The algorithm loves a good countdown. But what to list? That's the question. I mean, my first thought was biscuits. My first thought is always biscuits, but it's obvious the best biscuit is the custard cream, so a list seemed a bit redundant. Instead, I decided to knock up some totally biased nonsense about the best heroes from dungeon crawlers. And yes, this is my list, so I'm making all the rules. I am limiting myself to no more than one character from any one game, but other than that I am free to make my selections based on anything I darn well please. Nostalgia, miniatures, rules, whatever. It's a dungeon plunging free for all. You can all tell me how wrong I am in the comments, even though I know I'm totally right. And yes, this is a thinly veiled excuse to talk about some of my favourite board games again. Sue me. Actually, don't sue me, my boiler blew up last week and I'm skint. Regardless, let's get to it. My ultimate, totally legitimate, entirely infallible top 5 list of the best badasses to set foot inside a dungeon. Number 5, Telor. Come on, don't act like you didn't know at least one of the HeroQuest characters was going to make the list. And really, it had to be the wizard. No, I am not going to listen to any arguments for the dwarf. I am going to call the wizard Telor. In HeroQuest you never actually got to play as Telor, but that is the name that Games Workshop used for a pre-generated wizard character in Advanced HeroQuest that used this miniature. And to be clear, I am talking about the OG 1989 European wizard here, not Avalon Hill's update. Not that there's anything wrong with Avalon Hill's wizard, I mean, come on, just look at this guy. He doesn't look like he should be in a dungeon. He looks like he should be wearing a floppy hat and capering for the king. I always imagined he was entertaining the court with some simple magic tricks, maybe boasting about his magical prowess to impress the ladies, maybe showing them how big his hands are. Then, when word got out that Morcar had returned, he somehow got roped into going on an adventure he is ill prepared to deal with. He looks so spectacularly dorky. And look at the art on his character board. The art is brilliant. It's beautifully done, and it makes Telor look like he's about to team up with Kevin Sorbo for a very special episode of Hercules: The Legendary Journeys. By contrast, the modern rendition of the wizard just looks too cool. He looks far too put together and heroic. But I don't just love the wizard because of his looks. I wouldn't be so shallow. I love the way he plays. HeroQuest was the first board game I ever played where I realised that it was possible for players to take on characters with different personalities, who had different roles within the adventure. A character like the wizard, who played so very differently to someone like the barbarian, was fascinating and exciting to me. More than that, I was enthralled by the idea of having 9 spells that were a finite resource, 9 single-use tools with unique purposes, all gloriously brought to life by that spectacular artwork. To this day, I love single-use items in dungeon crawlers. There is something about that idea of having something in your possession that can really help, but you have to judge the best time to use it. I'm sure that love comes from the wizard and his spells. And those spells, the sheer variety of things you could do with them. You didn't just zap the baddies. Heck, there were only 3 damage-dealing spells across the 4 sets of 3. But you could heal people, put monsters to sleep, gain in strength, summon a genie, or even walk through walls. It was so inventive and exciting. And sure, modern dungeon crawlers do so much more with magic than HeroQuest ever dreamed, but for me, HeroQuest set the bar. I even loved the way the wizard acquired his spell sets. He took one set of spells, then the elf got to pick a set, and then the wizard got what was left. It seems like such a little thing, something mitigated by the North American rules and completely diluted by the introduction of elf spells in Mage of the Mirror, but letting the elf have a chance to screw with the wizard, to take the second best spell set, added an extra layer to the friendly rivalry that the European edition of the game was built on. The North American rule set did other things that in some ways lessened the wizard for me, weakened some of his spells, and changed line of sight rules to make it more difficult to use those spells effectively. But I do still love the wizard. I always will. Number 4, Lefardus, or Era. You know, wizards aren't my go-to choice when picking a character. I am more of a tanky sort of person myself. I like being able to take large amounts of damage while protecting other teammates, taunting enemies, and maybe providing various buffs and using team-based skills. Nevertheless, that doesn't stop a second wizard making it onto this list. Filling the number 4 spot is Lefardus from Legends of Andor. Admittedly, this is a weird choice, a bit of a curveball. Legends of Andor isn't exactly a dungeon crawl. There are certain scenarios that take place underground, but it's more of an adventure puzzle game. Furthermore, there isn't really much to differentiate the 4 heroes. They are all functionally identical, except they each have one unique ability. But I couldn't leave this character off my list for 2 reasons. Firstly, the presentation. Secondly, a really lovely mechanism for mitigating bad dice rolls, something that's always going to appeal to me. First of all, Lefardus is represented not by a miniature but by a standee. While I do prefer miniatures in general, the art in this game, created by the designer Michael Menzel, is absolutely lovely. The same art adorns the character boards, which are just as lovely. Some of the nicest and most fun character boards I have ever used. Check it out, there are spaces on the character art where you can position tokens to indicate what items your character has. You can have a shield, a bow, or a birdie, and you can wear a nice helmet. I love that. Additionally, with a flip of this board and a swap of the standee, Lefardus becomes Era. Personally, I couldn't care less if my avatar is male or female. My friends don't care either, but my daughter likes to play as female characters and my wife will go with a female character if there's a choice. And I know it's a big deal for a lot of other people, so it's always nice to see these sorts of options in a game. It's not often that having more options is a bad thing. But of course, all the things I've said so far apply to all the heroes in Legends of Andor, so why have I specifically picked the wizard? It's because of his special ability. Lefardus doesn't have spells, or access to a pool of magic, but his magical prowess is represented in combat by an incredibly simple rule for bending reality and twisting fate to his favour. When he rolls a d6 in combat, he is allowed to flip the dice to its opposite face. It's so simple, but I think it's such a clever way to represent the full force of his magical manipulations. Rolled a 1? Well, that becomes a 6. Your 2 is a 5. The worst he will ever roll is a 4. So while he may not be able to do the huge hits that the dwarf or warrior can, he is incredibly consistent. Better yet, if he is fighting with his allies, he is allowed to use this ability to manipulate one of their dice instead, which can really turn the tide of battle in the hero's favour. I am such a huge fan of streamlined fun rules that pack in loads of character and narrative. For me, this falls into that category. Number 3. Magnus the Bright. Okay, this is getting weird. I really don't play wizards often, but as I sat down to put this list together, thinking about everything that these different characters mean to me, the art, the miniatures, the mechanisms, I just couldn't leave Magnus the Bright off the list. This is, of course, the name of the pre-generated wizard character from Advanced HeroQuest, but Advanced HeroQuest lets you create your own heroes, so I'm not really talking about Magnus specifically here, but instead any wizard you wish to create. Advanced HeroQuest doesn't give you much in the way of special rules for characters. Indeed, I was sorely tempted to put Heinrich the Warrior on this list simply because of his characterful miniature. I love the way he is cowering. But I felt I couldn't justify it because he is a bit of a blank slate with no special skills or abilities to make him stand out. Your character in Advanced HeroQuest comes not from special abilities, but from the stats you develop, the equipment you find, and most importantly of all, the adventures you survive. It's a game much more interested in creating a hero you are invested in because you invested in them, rather than a hero who offers you many weird and varied skills. But of all the hero classes, the wizard offers the most in terms of rules to sink your teeth into. At the start of an adventure, the wizard is allocated a spellbook. In the core game, only the Bright spellbook is available, but more are available through the expansion and White Dwarf content. My personal favourite is the Light spellbook. It's awesome. And while your chosen spellbook comprises 12 unique spells, you only have access to 4. As your character grows and you scroll together your pennies, it is possible to purchase additional spells to expand the range of your magical capabilities. And there is a simple, perfect joy in reading through the various options to pick a new spell. And really, what incredible options they are. These spells took ideas I had seen in HeroQuest and ran for the hills with them. Spells like the Bright Key that lets the wizard create a doorway in a previously blank wall, Power of the Phoenix which can bring a dead hero back to life, and Inferno of Doom which drops a fireball template onto the board and roasts anything it touches. As with HeroQuest, spells are finite, but they aren't limited to one use per dungeon. Instead, you can cast any spell if you have the materials to do so. Want to bring someone back from the dead? That requires a phoenix feather and a dragon tooth. Want to encase yourself in magical armour? That requires red dragon dust. This system is genius. It gives a wizard, who as always isn't allowed to use most weapons and armour, a reason to accumulate money. They need to keep buying this stuff or they are going to be completely useless on the quest. It also adds a little strategy to your shopping trips, because to cast a spell it isn't enough to have any component, you must have the right component, and some components work for multiple spells. For example, a silver key would let you cast Open Window, or the Bright Key, or Courage. By stocking up on the right stuff, you can be much more flexible. And the component system also plays a part in how difficult the spell is to cast. If you only need one component, you can move as well as cast the spell. If you need two components, then you can't move as the more complicated spell requires all your attention. Playing a wizard in Advanced HeroQuest can be frustrating. You are very limited to begin with. If you are low on cash, it's incredibly difficult to scrape together the resources to feel useful, and you crumble like cracker bread if anything hits you. But if you survive a few missions, accumulate a little money, and unlock a few more spells, it really is a lot of fun. Number 2, Gottfried de Montbard. Okay, we are finally moving away from wizards, and it's time to pick a character from Warhammer Quest. Honestly, I could have picked quite a few from across Silver Tower, Shadows over Hammerhall, Blackstone Fortress and Cursed City, but I am limiting it to just one. Jelson Darrick came really close. I love gothic horror and he's a badass vampire hunter. He is my favourite character in Cursed City. But, after much deliberation, I had to go with Gottfried de Montbard from the Escalation expansion for Blackstone Fortress. Just look at that miniature, one of my favourites, if not my favourite, from the game. I really need to paint him. Gottfried is exactly the sort of character I usually pick when I want to play a dungeon crawler. He's a big burly chap in heavy armour, entirely armed with close combat weapons. His favourite thing to do is stand between his squishy mates and hordes of enemies, and he has an exceptionally high chance of shrugging off most incoming attacks before responding with extreme prejudice, even with my dice rolling. He is slow, he has a movement of 2 spaces and rolls a d6 for agility, so he's not in any hurry to get where he's going. But when he gets there, oh boy. His basic attack is a lunging strike which allows him to move 1 space before attacking. His more powerful attack, Hacking Advance, is pretty much more of the same. He gets to make 2 attacks, advancing 1 space towards the closest hostile before each one. And it's worth mentioning, he's rolling 2d8 on these attacks, or 2d12 once he's empowered. With these skills, it's possible to chain your way through multiple weak enemies, gaining ground and killing everything as you go. I have a wonderful mental image of Gottfried effortlessly striding through the corridors of the Blackstone Fortress, body parts flying all ways as he goes. He also has a special skill which I really like. It's basically defensive Overwatch. You get to place a shield wall marker on him, and while he has that marker, he will taunt hostiles who must attack him if he is visible and there are no other characters adjacent to them. The marker also lets Gottfried re-roll failed defense rolls, which he rolls on the d12, so already has a good chance of making. There is something very visceral and fun about playing as Gottfried. In the right circumstances, you don't have to waste any dice on movement. You simply lunge and attack, lunge and attack, lunge and attack. And once you are in the thick of trouble, you drop your shield as a challenge to all the hostiles nearby. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Who needs spells? And number 1. Finally, here we are at the end of all things, with my number 1 pick, my favourite hero for my favourite game. And continuing the theme of big burly chaps in heavy armour, it is Thargrim the Dark Lord, Warrior of Chaos from DungeonQuest. Ah, this guy. This miniature is just superb. It's a classic old hammer metal citadel miniature, and probably one of only a few Chaos Warriors who can almost compete with Slambo. Thargrim has 2 special abilities. Now, special abilities aren't really a thing in the DungeonQuest core game. Eladarin had a bow he could fire, but the other heroes just had different stats, plus skills from items they might have like magic rings. The heroes from DungeonQuest expansion changed all that. Most of the heroes, with the exception of 4 that were just metal versions of the core game heroes, had new skills. And to be fair, some of the new heroes went a bit far, with a few too many rules. But Thargrim is the perfect balance. One of his special abilities is rubbish. It's meditation. He misses a turn and gains 1 life point. You're never going to use that. Time is so precious and you can lose a life point so easily, it just doesn't feel like a justifiable trade-off, except maybe in a very rare, unusual circumstance that I can't imagine off the top of my head. However, it is hilarious to imagine this mighty Dark Lord taking a moment out of his day to find his zen. His other ability is much more useful, but no less amusing. He carries with him the Helm of Terror. Before a fight with a goblin, troll, orc or champion of chaos, he can spend 1 life point to don the mask and attempt to scare off his assailant. To achieve this, you have to roll 13 or more on 4d6. I find it so funny to think of Thargrim popping on his spooky Halloween mask and running around the dungeon waving his arms in an attempt to startle all the denizens. The guy's got issues. But he is really fun to play. He has a beautiful miniature, and maybe best of all, on the cover art of the expansion, he's made it out of the dungeon having stolen a little birdhouse. Maybe that's something for his Zen garden. So there we have it, my top 5, I don't know really. I wouldn't necessarily say best heroes, not even the heroes I would necessarily always pick to play, except for Thargrim. Let's say, heroes that I think are interesting. Or, probably more accurately, heroes I felt like talking about today. Top 5 lists are a sham. But that is it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I'll see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.